Oh,
Yeah, over to you, Melanie.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. It's lovely to see you. Hello, Tracy. Nice to see you too, Molly. I'm just going to screen share because we do have an awful lot to get through. So bear with me a second. There we go. And I'll go on to this. Oh no, hang on, wrong one. That one. That's the right one. There. Okay, can everyone see that okay? Good, good. So, magical house healing. The reason I put that as a title is because, unlike most of you, I haven't come from healing modalities. I've come from a slightly different angle. And I know people like Blossom are also very into magic, as is other people. But just to explain, and if I can get this to move. So, first of all, what exactly is magic? Now, some of you may know, and answers on a postcard, please, if you do. But I thought I would start with the Mr. Aleister Crowley, who in the occult we call Uncle Al. His mother called him the Great Beast, so he probably was a very interesting child. But he described magic as the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will. Now, whether you like Aleister or not, I'm not sure I do, but it's a very good description anyway. And my favourite, however, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Dion Fortune, who used to be Violet Frith. Dion Fortune's her magical name. And I'm fascinated by this woman. She's amazing. She was one of the few women that actually got involved with high magic. And she said, the magic is the art of causing change in consciousness to occur in accordance with the will. So it's very much with what we're doing anyway with house healing. We're using our will, our consciousness to actually make things happen. And there's so many types of magic, so many types. Some of you may recognize some of these people, some of you may not. The lady sitting at the table with the tarot cards is actually in the Museum of Witchcraft in Cornwall, which you've never been, is absolutely stunning. I spent 3 days in there. I didn't want to go home. But there's lots of different varieties of magic. But the point is, magic is just a term we use. And if anyone's ever seen Dean Radin's books or listened to his talks, he's fascinating. He's actually investigating it from a scientific angle and well worth looking up if you haven't come across Dean Radin. Fascinating chap. So let's look at some of the types. So we have indigenous shamanism. Now, one of the reasons I say indigenous is because a lot of this started way before it became trendy like it is now. But I thought these were wonderful pictures. The chap on the top left, I wouldn't like to meet him in a dark alley, but there you go. But he looks very intent. But shamanism is a contentious subject because, as it says here, the German explorer, 18th century, actually introduced the term shamanism, and it was based on Siberian magical practitioners, if you like. So that's one particular type. Like you'd have the Sami, you'd have all different traditions. Like in Ireland, we have particular type of shaman as well. But the shaman is like an overall term. And a lot of people use that without actually realizing where it really comes from. But they're walkers between the worlds. They're usually chosen because of something strange, like if they're epileptic, if they were gay, if they were in some way disabled, they were often chosen by the chief or by the past shaman to take over that position because they had something different, something otherworldly about them. But they were very much in two worlds. But the shamans are fascinating. But as I say, it becomes a lot more commercialized these days, which is a shame because every shaman, every village would have had someone that they went to for their magical practices, as we will see as we go through. With women, ladies were often associated more with magic in a different way than men were. You have the Oracle of Delphi there, the Pythoness that's over the crack in the actual fissure where all the fumes would have risen up, and she would have been given information that she would have relayed, usually very obscure. Below her, you have a lady with a staff. If you look very carefully at the bottom, I don't know if I can show you with this. No, my mouse won't work. But there's actually a little man figure with a sword through his stomach. So it looks like she was cursing him. So it's often seen as a negative thing. You also have crystal gazing and divination. That's a very feminine type of magic. That's not necessarily how they always were. but that's how many of us were seen. If you were into magic, you were a witch. Whereas men, who were far more into high magic, usually, they were usually educated, they usually could read and write, and they usually had high status. So we have here John Dee, who most people would know, I'm sure, and Edward Kelly, his very strange friend. The Book of English Magic, if you're ever interested, is a fascinating book. That's a really, really good book to read on this time. Absolutely amazing information. And John Dee would have been working for Queen Elizabeth I. He even worked out the day that she was supposed to be not christened, when she was supposed to ascend to the throne. And he was also known as 007 as a code name, which I thought was really cool. Had 4 hours sleep a night and was extremely extreme polymath. He was incredibly good at lots of things. And the items in the both the sort of like a seal at the top and a black mirror at the bottom. I was in the British Museum last year, and there's a whole cabinet that contains all his items. If you ever get to the British Museum, it's worth looking for. Beautiful things, absolutely stunning things. But he was an astrologer. John Dee was an absolutely incredible guy, but it was very, very ritual magic, high magic, and it was for the learned people. Quite a lot of priests as well were into high magic, even though it was against Christianity, but most of them were dabbling in something. But it wasn't usually common for women to do this kind of work until much later. Dion Fortune, people like her, did much, much later on. I thought this would be interesting because the cunning man or cunning woman is known as low magic or folk magic. And we would be considered to be cunning folk if we'd been put back in time. What we do, finding lost objects, dowsing, healing, all the things that we do, that's what the cunning folk did. They were usually not uneducated, but they weren't highly educated, and they could be, every village had one, a cunning man or a cunning woman, and they were really interesting. And at the very, very top, there's a man there standing with the cunning man written next to him. That is an exceptionally interesting film. And I might put that up on the Night's Rose because it's absolutely beautiful. It's very, very slow burn, but it might show you what they did in the old days, because it's based on somebody traditionally in that area. I can't remember exactly where it was. I think it might be the Isle of Man. But the cunning folk would have found lost things. They would have helped. And because they often had a book, like a grimoire, when it says about Jim Baker above that, that's actually a section of one of their spells. Sometimes they couldn't read, sometimes they couldn't write, sometimes they just copied. So it became a little bit blurred. But what they did was basically help people who didn't have the money to go to anybody else. So they're amazing. Some of them were complete charlatans, but a lot of them were very, very good. And in Ireland, where I live, Biddy Early would have been the equivalent of a cunning person. And over here, we call them a fairy doctor or a banfassa. And ban just means female in Irish, and fassa just means wisdom, so wise woman. And you can see by this really run-down house, this is where she used to live. In the book, you can see by Eddie, who's just up the road from me. He's lovely, Eddie. He's a folklorist, really nice guy. That's what her cottage used to look like. That's what it looks like now. And this, funny enough, spookily enough, was the first place Wolf and I looked at when we came to Ireland. We were looking at houses, and it was on the list, 5,000 punts or nearest offer, which is 4,000, I think, in English. And but it's also cursed, so we didn't buy it. And all the locals, we were looking at it, this old guy came up to me and said, "You don't want to be buying that, be cursed like me." And I thought, okay, maybe not in that accent. So we didn't. But my solicitor and his wife, who we're very good friends with here, they still own it. And they said all sorts of people turn up and wander there, much to their horror. But what happens is, Biddy had this amazing bottle. I can't really, maybe I've got a little bottle here, a little blue bottle, like a medical poison bottle. And she was gifted it. Her son was playing hurling, which is a bit like hockey and lacrosse, with the fairies. And he was coming along one day, and they asked him to help play a game of hurling. And because they were one man down or one fairy down. And so he joined in, and they won. And so they gave him the bottle and told him to give it to his mother, Biddy, which is another word for Bridget, by the way. And Biddy was the local kind of folk healer. And she'd grown up with the Anshi, with Fae. So she was very worldly wise with them as well. And they said, your mother will know what to do with it. And so she used to use it to scry, like you'd use a crystal ball. And somebody would come to her and they'd say, oh, will I live? And she'd look in the bottle. And allegedly, if she saw a skeleton, you'd die. If she saw something else, she'd have a cure for you. So she was quite formidable, and people come from all over Ireland and in England to visit her in this tiny little cottage in the middle of nowhere. And when she died, on her deathbed, she asked the priest to take the bottle and throw it back into the lake because it belonged to the An Siad, the fairies. And he lied the first time and said he'd thrown it in. And she said, nope, no, they've just told me you've still got it. So she made him go and throw it in the lake because it had to be given back, because people would wanted to use it because it had such power. And I don't know if anybody's ever read a Terry Pratchett, or is that a silly question? And Granny Weatherwax is actually based on Biddy and several other people, like Mother Shipton, I should imagine. Terry Pratchett came to Ireland not far from here and gave a whole talk and conference one weekend. And we were asking him about Granny Weatherwax, and he admitted that she was one of the main influences. A lot of the things she did, and I can recommend books if you want, but she was fascinating. She used to scare the hell out of people. And when she died, 22 priests came to her funeral, wedding, to make sure she was dead. The locals told me, because they were so frightened of her. So she had quite the reputation. And even now, she's been dead 100 years. People are still obsessed that there's a curse and all sorts of things. She's not. She's just a legend. She's just an amazing woman, and she never did anybody any harm, but she was fascinating. So that's an example of a cunning person. Now, I know you're going to have Gary Dacey talk very soon, and I know this book made a big impression on Gary as well, The Way of Weird. And I read this book when it first came out, and it was stunning. It's all about Anglo-Saxon magic. So, but The Way of Weird is almost like fate. And you've got the picture here of the three girls doing the spinning and cutting and weaving of fate. But weird existed before the gods and will exist after them. Yet weird lasts only for an instant, because it is the constant creation of the forces. Weird is itself constantly changing, like the seasons, yet because it is created every instant, it is unchanging. Like the still center of a whirlpool, all you can see are the ripples dancing on top of the water. So we're all part of the weird. We're all affected by the weird, which is why I decided to say growing up weird, because I really did, every sense of the word. Okay, so this is about me, so I hope I'm not going to bore you too much. My husband is an artist, and part of my druid, actually, Dawn and I were talking about the Bardic grade earlier, weren't we? And part of the Bardic grade was to recapitulate your childhood or your life. And so I started doing mine and ended up making a whole set of tarot cards out of it. It just made sense as the major arcana. So if anyone's familiar with the major arcana, this would have been my full card. And when I was young, I was obsessed by the space and stars and UFOs and everything. And so I would walk up to these really, really high buildings. They were like flats, ugly, ugly flats. They'll see a picture of them later on. And I'd take my telescope and I'd go up to the very, very top, because obviously being in the middle of London or the edges of London, we were in Kent, but right on the edges of London. So it was like where the compost bin was kept in the Garden of England. It wasn't very pleasant. And I'd climb up really, really high because there was so much light pollution and smog and horrible light and traffic. And the tiger I always had as a child. He went everywhere with me. I have no idea where he came from, my invisible friend. But I had this tiger for as long as I can remember. So my husband drew that for me. And when I was 2 years old, I was taken to London Zoo, and I vanished, as all toddlers do, and put absolute panic, and that everyone was looking for me, and then found me sitting on the edge of the tiger's enclosure, chatting away to a Bengal tiger who was sitting there very patiently listening to me, my toddler kind of tirade, and didn't make any, he could have just swiped me, I was told, but he didn't. He just sat there listening very intently. So I'm not sure whether that's why I got a tiger or whether the tiger was already there, but doesn't really matter. But tiger was always there until I was about 20. Then he disappeared and was replaced by something else. Mr. Spock was my first love. Don't laugh, it's true. And the tarot, I always read the tarot cards for 53 years now. And astronomy and astrology were my two passions as well. I loved both. I was brought up by an Irish family who were very, very anti anything strange and weird, so that was fun. And I wanted a pack of tarot cards. I was never allowed to have one. Then my aunt, who was very, very normal and straight and but very kind, was one day in a shop, and she said she was waiting to buy a little bottle of ink back in the 70s. And she noticed while she was waiting, because the guy was serving someone else, that there was a little tiny pack of tarot cards in this glass cabinet. And she looked down and she was like, oh, I know somebody who'd like that. And she heard in her ear, buy them for Melanie. And so she turned around and there was nobody there. And so she was a little bit freaked, but she leant back again and got exactly the same thing whispered in her ear, and so terrified that she bought them and ran out the shop and realized she'd forgotten her ink. So I got my first pack of tarot cards gifted to me, as you're supposed to, allegedly, which I don't believe in, but when I was 12. And that's my same pack, and that's my little thing that you can see in the picture as well. This is a dryad, which is helping me today. So I got my tarot cards, and they were my passions growing up. That and Patrick Moore, but we won't talk about him, bless him. I was abandoned when I was 4 months old. My mother was English, my father was American. That's who's visited, by the way, but Dawn will tell you. Because this was the late 50s when I was born. I didn't exist until I was 4 months old when I was abandoned. I was found in a dog basket on a train station because I had double pneumonia and I was very, very premature. So I was really tiny and very sick. And my mother thought I was dying, and I didn't legally exist. She used to go to work and give me to a neighbour to look after, because you couldn't be a single mum in those days. And if you had a baby, you just lost your job. So she had to pretend. So a little old lady used to look after me, and I lived in a tiny, tiny little basement, dark basement. And apparently I never saw daylight until I was 4 months old, which is why I think I love the dark. I've always loved the dark. And the other Melanie who's listening, Melanie, I'm pretty sure you'll know this as well, but Melanie means darkness. So I also thought that was rather spooky. So I was found on this dog basket, taken to hospital. They saved my life. Thank you very much. I was then adopted by an Irish family who couldn't have children. And as you can see by the horrible black and white picture, that's the flats I used to climb up to look at the stars. It's a really horrible place. And my only solace was the local library. And as you can see by the picture, it's not exactly the most attractive building either. But I used to live in that library. I used to go in there and read and read and read. And I read all the children's books long before I was old enough for an adult card. My parents didn't read. They didn't, just watch the telly. And I asked the lady if I could have an adult book. And she said, oh, well, no, you have to wait so many more years. And she said, oh, maybe your parents can come and give you a card. And I thought, well, they don't know where the library is, let alone what to do with a book. So bless her, and whoever you were, and I wish I'd remember your name, she unofficially let me take a book out every week as an adult, unofficially. And I read so much. That was when I first found my first book of magic. I must have been about 9. And I thought, yes, I was fascinated because there was things I wanted to read that I could never get access to. So very carefully, she slipped this little book underneath everything else I took out. And it opened my world completely. So librarians, thank you. And the only place I ever felt happy was in the woods. That's Franks Park, and below that is Lesness Abbey. Now, Franks Park I could get to from home. I used to have to walk about 3 or 4 miles, but it was worth it. It was beautiful big woodland. And I went to St Joseph's Convent Grammar School in Abbey Woods, which you were actually in Kent, weren't you, Tim? So you probably know Bexley. And I went to 8 different secondary schools. I was beaten up at every single one. I was really, really quiet, shy, and never said a word. I know you're not going to believe that, but I was really introverted. And that was the only school I actually enjoyed. And the girl, it says Kate Bottom, second left in the first year. That's actually Kate Bush. I hit her in the eye with a hockey stick. That's my only claim to fame. It was totally accidentally. But she was amazing. I was there for a few years with her, and she was as beautiful and as talented then as she is now. So we both went to the same school, and her dad was our local doctor. It was a really, really odd place. But the nuns used to hate me. I was the only non-Catholic in the whole school, and I was also weird without being Christian at all. And so I used to play hooky in the woods opposite, which is where Lesness, it's literally just down the road from where the school was. I used to disappear in there when it got too much. And I spent hours in that woods. And so years and years later, I applied for a job as a conservation ranger, a woodland ranger, and I got the job because I knew the place better than they did. I used to know all the little places that nobody else knew, and I used to live in that woods, and I loved that woods. I even met my husband in that woods, so it's very precious to me. So that was my very unpleasant childhood. Won't go into too far. There are a few of more. These are the black and white versions of what my husband drew, so they're very, very simple. But the emperor card in the top there is that was my father. He was from Bantry Bay originally, and a very, very controlling and not very well. He wasn't a bad person. He just was terrified of being psychic, which he was. He was born on Ian Howner, which in Ireland is Halloween. So he was naturally very psychic and absolutely terrified of everything. He'd gone through the war and seen terrible things, both in the war and magically, and it really upset him. And when I started seeing things, it made him even more unhappy. We lived in a little two up, two down, and he bought a house opposite, which was in a terrible state. It'd been derelict for a while. And because he was a carpenter, we used to go over there and do it up together. He insisted I came with him because he knew that I could feel, I knew when the ghost was there. And the ghost was the little old lady that used to live there before, who was perfectly safe. She was, but he used to be terrified of her. And we'd be working away with his other brother, who was very, very psychic as well. And they'd suddenly go rigid and they go, "Is she here yet?" And I go, "Yep," because you'd smell the lavender water. We were talking about this earlier, Dawn, when you can smell things sometimes. And I always smelled lavender water before she came. And so I knew he could see them as much as I could, but he was absolutely terrified of them. There's other stories. I'll only tell you one because there's so many. I'll be here all day. The strange position I'm standing there as a kid. I fell in love with a guy at school, like you do, kind of crushes. Keith Maynard. Oh gosh, palpitations still. And he was this kind of unattainable guy when I was in my kind of second year or something. And one night, and I didn't have any friends. I never had any friends. I just had my books. I used to be mad in my books everywhere. And we had one wet sports day when we couldn't go out. We were told just to amuse ourselves in the classroom for double lesson. And Uri Geller had been on the television the night before. Do you remember Uri Geller? Anybody? And he'd been madly spoon bending. So it was the talk. It had gone viral, as we'd say nowadays. And so somebody went down to the kitchens in the school and stole all the spoons, like you do when you're a kid, and came up when we were all desperately trying to bend the spoons. And I did it, and nobody else did. And I thought I went through half a dozen spoons before I decided I was going to get into more trouble. But suddenly I became popular for the first time. It was like, oh, suddenly everyone was talking about spooky things. It was fascinating. It was the only thing I knew anything about. So I was suddenly popular. And then Keith Maynard come and asked me out. I nearly fainted. I was so excited. He wouldn't have looked twice at me normally. I was suddenly kind of the thing of the moment. And so he said, "Would you like to walk home with me?" And I thought, okay, I'll go to the end of the earth. And so I followed this guy home, trying not to be weird. And we passed a zebra crossing, like a walkway. And as we went past it, I heard a scream, I heard a thud, and I heard this bike wheel spinning round and someone screaming. And I turned around expecting to see an accident, and there was nothing there. And I was as white as a sheet and shaking because I'd heard this accident. It was real in my head. And I looked at him and he just looked back and said, "Are you being weird?" And I was like, "No, no, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine." And so I carried on walking, thinking, don't spoil this, don't spoil this. And so I carried on walking home with him, and we had tea and he was walking me back, and we got to exactly the same place but facing the other way, and the accident happened right in front of us, literally. One lad went across the zebra crossings and he made it. The other little boy, his brother, tried and didn't make it and ended up going underneath the car. Car couldn't stop him. It was around a bend, so the poor woman didn't see till she was nearly on top of him. And because I'd seen it, so I was rushing around and getting sweet tea and putting my jump under this little boy's head and calling an ambulance. I knew what had happened already, but my potential boyfriend was standing there catching flies, looking terribly frightened and a little bit freaked. And because we were the only eyewitnesses, we had to give a statement to the police. And he said to me afterwards, "Don't ever speak to me ever again." So that was my 2 hours of romance with Keith Maynard, which kind of didn't really help. But there you go. So it doesn't always help being weird. So that was one reason. That I won't bore you with the other stories yet because there's lots of them. So I went through school and I hated being at school, although I loved the learning. and I wanted to stay on to do my A-levels, and I was it. There was no other people staying in school. This was 70s, mid-70s, and there were jobs everywhere, so everybody just went and got a job. And I wanted to stay on, and they said they couldn't do the A-level just for me. So they said, you'll have to get a job. And I went to the careers office, and they said, well, you can be a secretary, you can be a nurse, or you can work in a shop, because that's the only option girls had in the 70s. And I said, I don't want to do any of them. I want to be a pilot. So I joined the RAF for 3 whole days. I always wanted to fly a plane. And I passed every single test there was, mental, physical, failed the medical. And when I was told I failed, I said, well, what did I fail on? He said, you're a girl. You can't fly. NATO treaty, you can't fly. So I got back completely floored. I thought, well, I want to be a pilot. He just told me I'm a natural pilot. My son, I paid for his lessons when he was 30. He was told he was a natural type pilot too, but his wife wouldn't let him. Never mind. I'd even written to NASA when I was 11 to be a pilot, to be an astronaut. I stayed up all night long to watch the moon landing, whether it's real or not, I don't care. I watched every moment of it. And they wrote to me and said, yes, you might have to be a bit older than 11 to join, but to be trying. So I never did get to, because they said I'd need to be a pilot. So my whole ambition of career went down the toilet completely. But what I didn't know was that my real father, unknown father, as you can see, on the very smart Harley there, was a Texan. He was also he used to fly Phantom F4s, and he was in the Thunderbird air display team, which is a bit like the Red Arrows in England. And I never knew him. I never met him. But he did turn up tonight, apparently, or today, didn't he? Or he came to see us. I talked to him before the talk. And he was a very good pilot, but he unfortunately got killed when he was 28. He was in a plane crash and died. I have no memory of him. I must have been about 4.5 when he died. But he did tend to turn up originally, as we'll see. So when we're talking about the cunning folk or the shamans, they're usually somebody that has a foot in both worlds. Now, I was always away with the fairies, I think is the polite term they used to use. I spent all my time in that woods, Franks Park, and I had this little place. Now, this is interesting because it's actually called Temple Mount, which is a Knights Templars place. And the whole place had loads of connections with the Knights Templar. So I thought that was very interesting. I cut my teeth in that woods and in Lesson Abbey Woods, which also has Templar connections. And the magical initiation I did when I was like 12. I hadn't got a clue what I was doing. I'd read a book and did it. And it was, the thought was there, the skill was not. So I redid that again in the same woods when I was 18, when I did know what I was doing, hopefully a bit more. I became a professional tarot reader in London for a while. But the most interesting thing was I loved anything psychic, and I joined a group called Casper. Now, Casper was named after a ghost that they actually invented. I don't know if you know that, Dawn, the story of Casper. They invented a ghost, and he started communicating. So that was the name of our group, and we were very, very kind of young, kind of teenagers, very into psychic research. And I volunteered to sit into the local spiritualist church. Now, I don't know whether everybody knows what a spiritualist church is, but they're basically a place where the medium would come and stand on a platform and give readings. So I was 17, 18, and they were all in their 70s, so I didn't stick out at all. Nobody guessed I was a plant at all. I was obviously blended in perfectly. And so I'd go there every Sunday religiously, and I'd listen. And I was so looking forward to meeting a real medium, and they weren't. They were appalling. There's a thing called fishing, where a bit like cold reading, where people will say, oh, I've got somebody in the audience of a male vibration, which is half the population. Or it's like, oh, I got somebody with the letter F, and that would say, well, that's my Frank. So it was really awful. And I used to write everything down. I used to take every single reading and write it down in my book. Then I'd go afterwards and interview them to find out if it was true. And most of them, it was so hit and miss. It could have just been guessing. And then one day, right towards the end of the year, which I'd said I'd stay there, this woman came in like a ship under sail. She was amazing. And she literally was shouting and screaming at nothing as she came in the door. And I thought, oh God, this is a new one. What's tricks this one? And I realized, no, she was the real deal. She was the only real medium I ever saw there in that whole year. And normally you'd have this kind of fishing going on, she would just say, you this, you this, you this, and there was tears and dropped jaws and hysterics. It was I couldn't write it down quick enough, and another lady started helping me write it down because there were so many stories, and she was brilliant. And so everybody left in awe of this woman, and she came back next week and there was even more people. So I really didn't manage to write it all down. But before she left the first time, she came to me. My first ever time I got a message in the whole year I've been there. She said, oh, young girl at the back. And I said, I was 18. And I thought, I was so shocked. And as she was about to give me this message, the guy who was in charge of the spreadsheet said, oh, I'm sorry, we ran out of time. And literally shuffled her off the stage. Second time, it happened again, right at the very end. And again, she was stopped. And the third week, I was thinking, oh, this is obvious. He knows I'm not meant to be here. And she did it again the third week. Now, I was the only one that used to make the tea and wash up and make the bickies. And so I was in the back. And when she was having a cup of tea afterwards, I gave her this cup of tea and she grabbed my arm and she said, he's always late. And I thought, who? She said, the man that's always standing behind you, he's always late. And I thought, okay, I can't see anyone behind me. And she said, he's an American. He's got wings on his shoulder and stripes, 3 stripes. And she described him. She said, he looks a bit like you. And I thought, I have no idea who you're talking about. And she said, he's bending down and he's putting on pink booties and he's saying he's really sorry. And that was my message. And I said, I'd love to say I know what that means, but it means absolutely nothing to me. But thank you very much. And so she told me to take it away in a psychic carrier bag, which I thought was a lovely thing to say. And I did. And years later, I found out who he was, totally by accident. So he's been with me a long time, which is rather nice. So it's nice to know he's still around, young Dick. As for actual magic, I lived very close to London, not that close, but close enough. And I must have been about 20. I attended my first real magical kind of weekend, or it was only a day course, Village Witchcraft in London, early 80s. And I met Marion Green, who was a lovely lady. She's a high magician and into other things, more kind of like country witchcraft. And I was on her course for the day and we got talking. And I got this letter afterwards saying, you're a networker, I need you to run my green circle. And that was it. A week later, I was running the green circle. I was so gobsmacked. And then I did that for like 7 years and I ran all the conferences and I got to meet everyone. It was like one of these kind of cornucopias of people. I met all sorts of really important, fascinating and magical folk. So thank you, Marion, for that. She trusted me and she was a very interesting person to learn from. But even my son thought she was wonderful. But this is the lady that really made a big impression on me. The lady in the dark clothing there. That's Naomi and Caitlin. Caitlin you'll come across later on. I've known Caitlin for years, but Naomi Humphreys was the most amazingly magical person. She was like the ideal priestess, and she was very into Egyptian magic, and she taught me to dowse properly. I dowsed from a book from the library, which was not very good, but she taught me to properly dowse. She was fantastic. And she was mad on the tarot, Sue, so we had lots in common, and we did lots and lots of high magic mostly. She ran a green circle group in Orpington in Kent, and her and Jerry. And I remember going to the first night and it was really lovely. We'd do a meditation and we'd talk about things and it was really interesting. And then as we were all going, she was giving her a hug and saying, see you Friday, see you Friday, see you Friday. And I'm thinking, this is once a month. Have I misunderstood? And I said, so am I here next week? She went, oh, no, that's a private inner group. No, sorry. And I thought, oh God, I've just got my foot in it. And so she insisted I came into the living room and sat down and we did this meditation together. And she said she wanted to look at my aura, which was a bit scary. And she said, oh, you've done this before. Yes, you can join. So I ended up being in this magical group with all these people doing all this high magic for years, which was fascinating. Not my kind of thing now, but it was very, very interesting when it happened. But she was stunning. She was incredible. And she's running a whole Egyptian thing at the moment. She's very nice. But Caitlin, you'll see later on. This chap was the person that made a very big impression on me. He was a shaman. He was an English shaman, and Dusty the 13th, and Dusty Miller, and you'll see him with a little green pointy hat in the bottom middle picture, and his son with the beard, you can use a badger in, is his son behind him. So he's the 13th, and his son's Dusty Miller the 14th, and they're tree shamans. They've worked with trees and worked in woods, and he was in Kent. Dusty was an absolute darling. I loved him. He was, we met at events because I was doing the Green Circle thing, and he used to give us talks and workshops. And he was the first person that visited me in Ireland when we moved here as well. He just found me. I don't know how he managed to find me because we didn't tell him the address. He just appeared one day at the door like he did. And I was very sick with cancer 4 times, with cervical cancer at stage 4. And he used to turn up on my doorstep and say, "We're going for a walk now." And he'd drag me through the woods and he'd teach me all this stuff. And I swear he's the only reason I'm still standing. But so he's my hermit card. So he led the way. He's the most gentle soul. He only died last year. And but he taught me so much about dryads and trees and everything. He was an amazing guy. So they do still exist, and he was the real deal. And if you look him up, you'll probably find something about him. He's very sorely missed. He's a bit like your Hamish to me, but Dusty was amazing. In the real world, because I couldn't be a pilot, I went back to the careers office because I refused to do all the things they wanted me to do. As a punishment, the woman sent me to a greenhouse. It was an industrial horticultural kind of nursery, which I didn't know anything about. And so I ended up doing commercial horticulture and loved it. I'm a Taurian, so I didn't have any problem with being in horticulture. I went to agriculture college. I was sent by my boss to agriculture college because he said women never lasted the week, and I was there for a long time. And I went to agriculture college, and I was the only girl and 500 boys. It was a dirty job, but someone had to do it. It was hell. Not. They were brilliant. So I learned to drive tractors and arc weld and glaze greenhouses and all sorts of very practical stuff. So which came in very handy when we moved to Ireland in a ruin. So that was brilliant. I really loved the college. And I ended up teaching horticulture both in London and then when I moved over here in Ireland. And I also I wanted to be a ranger. I really loved ecology. So I went to University of London night school. I'd work all day as a ranger and I'd go to night school afterwards. And I started to do ecology, which is just amazing. I liked this description. The study of Earth household, I thought that was rather appropriate. More precisely, is a scientific study of the relationship between the members of the Earth household and their natural environment. So we're all part of the ecology. It's the most dynamic system. It's fascinating. So I loved being on the earth. The other job I had, which was fascinating, was working in Highgate Cemetery in London, which is a really old Gothic Victorian cemetery. And this is not the one where Karl Marx is buried. This is the old one that's only open on certain days. And I was teaching for Bulldog, which was a probation service. So if you had to do your community service or you had come out of prison, then they had to do community work. So I used to take them into Highgate Cemetery, and the trees were totally overgrown, and these poor graves were being knocked over and corrupted by the roots. So our job was to basically take the trees down without breaking the graves, which was interesting. And we couldn't just chop them. I had a chainsaw license. I couldn't just chop them because that would have smashed the graves. So I used to have to go up them and then cut them one by one and drop them down to these guys because they weren't insured to come up. And so I was merrily up there one day and cutting away, and I woke up in hospital. I fell out of the tree and landed on a mausoleum, and they thought I'd broke my back. So that was the end of that little thing, but I didn't. As you can see by the left-hand picture, that's me falling out of the tree. That's my hanged man. I'd just blacked out. I had no idea why. I woke up to find that I'd been x-rayed 4 times because they were convinced I broke my back. I hadn't. I was very lucky. I bounced apparently. And the doctor said to me, "Why didn't you tell us you were pregnant?" I thought, well, first of all, I was unconscious. And secondly, I didn't know I was pregnant. I was very pregnant. I was like 4 months pregnant. And I just got rid of him as well. My boyfriend, who was really horrible. But so I ended up having to tell him he was going to be a dad, which is scary. But they tried to insist that I aborted the child, which I don't have a problem with abortion personally, if it's a needed to be thing. But I was not in any state to do that at the time, and I knew it wasn't the right thing to do. So I just said, look, I'm on lots and lots of painkillers. I'm not making that kind of decision when I'm not conscious. And so I told them to shuffle off, and I'll come back and look at your little file thing later on. And I went to bed that night in the hospital and observation, and I had the weirdest dream. My son told me he was going to be fine and I should have him. He even told me what day he was born. I woke up in this dream, just have this big red calendar with Saturday, 4th of August. That's the only words on it. And this was like February, I don't know when it was, sometime miles away from when the baby was going to be born. And so I said, no, I'm not going to let you abort him. It's going to be a boy, and I know where he's going to be born and everything. And they thought I was just cracked. And he was born on Saturday, 4th of August. And I went to hospital 3 times. They kept sending me home because I wasn't, technically speaking, due, they said, until September, but he was born exactly on time. And so I swear my son told me he was going to be okay. So that was interesting. Highgate, as I say, was fascinating, and I later worked in the Lesnes Abbey, and that's me putting out fires and pond dipping, because we had a chap in the woods who caused 265 fires in 6 weeks. He was Section 28 from the army, and he basically just cycled around our woods setting fire to it. And of course, we were right next to all the houses and the schools and shops and everything. So I spent 6 months putting out fires and racing around with fire brigade. So that was an interesting experience. And my little, if you look in the background, just above where the fishing net is, that's my little boy on his roller skates. He's come to meet me after school every day, and he'd whiz around on his roller skates picking up litter. Bless him, he was as good as gold. He used to help me in the woods. So that was my strange experience. I thought this one might be very, very interesting because it's a dowsing story. This isn't my ex-boss, but that's, if you imagine, if you've ever seen Del Boy from Steptoe and Son, not Steptoe and Son, sorry, that was Only Fools and Horses, beg your pardon. He had the camel hair coat, he had the filofax, he had the big old phone, the whole lot. I was a gardener. I'd worked, I worked as a kind of self-employed gardener for a while, and it's after my son was born. And in the wintertime, it's very hard to get work, especially when it's snowing. So someone said to me, oh, can you answer a phone? I said, oh, yeah, I can answer a phone, no problem. So I got put in this office in London, and it was the people who put the for sale signs up on houses. So we'd get, we can send me this sign or whatever. So I'd send someone out, and they put the signs up. And I had this really, really old computer, and it was ancient, but it was new in those days. And that was fine. And then suddenly I came to work one day, it was missing, it's gone completely. And it looked like we'd been burgled. And I was like, oh dear, it's terrible. And the police came, and he claimed on the insurance. Then the next week, my computer turned up with my files on and everything. And I'd written down the file number and the serial number because I'm OCD. And I said, well, it's the same computer. And he went, no, definitely not the same computer. And he went 4 times. My computer vanished and bounced back 4 times. And every single time, your man made loads of money out of the insurance because his brother ran the computer shop. So you can imagine what kind of scam we're talking. And I was like, okay, fine, I'm just doing my job. And everyone was getting annoyed at it. But then we never got paid. He stopped paying us. There was about 6 or 7 of us, and none of us got paid. Our checks would bounce, or he'd promised that it wouldn't turn up. And then one day he said to me, here's the checkbook. I want you to go and pay everyone. I'm going on holiday. And he vanished. And there was no money in the account. He cleaned everything out and vanished. So not only did I have everyone screaming for all the stuff that he owed them for the business, but I had all the staff. So everyone was out of pocket, and he just done a runner. And the CID came again. We were on first name terms by this time. And I said, look, I think there's something I should tell you. And I told him all this, and I gave him all the information I had, and I'd written it all down in my diary when he'd gone and what he'd done. And so the guy said, if only we could find him. This is the 80s, very early 80s. And I said, well, give me an atlas. I'll find him. I can douse. And so he gave me literally an atlas of the world, and I doused him, and I got Corfu, and I got the northern part of the island. Now, obviously, there was no internet, no Google. And so I phoned the travel agents up like you do. And I said, oh, I'm looking to go to Corfu, and I like the name of the 3 most expensive hotels on the island, because he was a poser. He was going to have the most expensive place. I found him in the second one. And the CID were on him straight away, and he evaded them 3 times. And because he had all these keys to houses that weren't occupied, he had access to hide everything. So I took the list of all the houses and I doused them, and I found him in every single time we found him. He'd do a runner, but the 3rd time they caught him, literally caught him. And so I had to go to court in London in front of a jury, which was terrifying. And I had to give evidence. Now, the CID man said to me, we use people like you all the time, but we can't tell anybody because they will just throw out the case. So I had to pretend that I hadn't doused, and I pretended all these other ways I'd found him. And the prosecution actually accused me of witchcraft, which I'm terribly proud of now, looking back. But at the time, it was horrifying in front of a jury. But so he couldn't prove what I'd done, and I wasn't agreeing with him, so he did get put away. And I actually met him years and years later, and he was terrified of even crossing paths with me, which I thought, well, I wasn't going to turn you into a toad. He already was one. But it was just satisfying to know that he actually got caught, because he apparently he'd done this like 4 or 5 different places, and he'd got away with it every single time. So that's one of my few times I've ever almost been burned at the stake. I also used to go up to London to a place called Talking Stick, which was like a place where people come and talk about magic in London. And there was a wonderful guy there who used to work for Friends of the Earth, and he started an eco-magical group called Dragon. Now, Dawn, we were talking about dragons, weren't we, before? And so this is my dragon. And so this was a magical organization that was actually going to help save woods. And where my woods was near the Thames. On this map on the top right, it's near let's see, it's just off, slightly off the map, but this was very close. This is very close to where I used to live. And so when I realized what they were doing, they were putting an 8-lane motorway through an ancient woodland with triple SIs and all sorts of beautiful fragile things. And Oxley's Woods was stunning, and they'd already been fighting this for a while. And so I decided, well, they were talking about going to the Amazon and tying themselves to trees. And I said, well, I can't do that. I'm a single mum. I'm not going to go hop on a train or a plane and go off to the Amazon. I said, why don't we do something right on our doorstep? So we got involved with the Oxleys, and we worked very hard to help them. And because I was a ranger, I had this big chalk pit in the woods, which was where all the rubbish had been put for years, especially after the 87 storm when all the trees came down. So I said, well, can we take this as our own conservation area? And we'll do all the work here. And once we did all the conservation work, and we'd have a big bonfire, and because it was enclosed and it was locked, we could do whatever we wanted there at night. So we used to do our rituals to save the woods. So we did lots and lots of eco-magical work as a group to save the woods. And I wouldn't say that we saved it single-handed, because there was an awful lot of people doing far more important things than we ever did. Mostly solicitors and lawyers, and they've been fighting this for years. It was a fascinating project, but I was like the link in the committee. And I even did I was doing my thesis at the time for ecology, and I was told if I did it on the woods, I'd lose 25% of my marks automatically because it's political. But I thought, it's going to sit on a dusty shelf, or it's going to go to a public inquiry and do some good. So I did, and I still got I think I got a merit as opposed to a distinction, which was a bit disappointing, but it saved the woods, so I'm not that bothered about that. And it was fascinating, and thousands of people would turn up. We had Jonathan Porritt, we had David Bellamy, we had all these famous people turn up and give talks. Everyone was very supportive. The police and the fire brigade, who I worked with in the woods, both told me that if it came to bulldozers, that they were going to take a blue collar day off and all be sick. And everybody, and I used to go around to schools and Trans Women Guilds and things and give talks about the ecology. And one little old lady came up to me, because we actually adopted all the trees. We marked all the trees and we sold them all, technically speaking, to raise money, what we were doing. And one little old lady came up to me and said, I'd love to tie myself to a tree, dear, but I've got a bladder. So she couldn't do it. So she said, if I tied myself to a tree, she'd happily come and bring me tea and buns, but she couldn't tie herself to anything for that long. So we had lots of people who made wonderful kind of offers. And I went to school, and there was a little boy who was 10, and I gave a whole talk about the woods. And he came up and said to me, I've got a petition too, which he'd written in crayon, basically. And he lived in a street, one of the many streets that were going to be knocked down by this road as well. And he said that little old lady next door to him had been born there. She'd got married there, she'd had her kids there, and she wanted to die in that house. And they were forcing her to leave. And so this little 10-year-old had written this whole petition to stop the road. And he got about 20 signatures. So we took it, photocopied it, and got hundreds of signatures. And of course, all this went to the Department of Transport. And so I don't know what we did. We even turned up at the Department of Markham Street, and we were witches doing Macbeth. So we did lots of really strange things. But at the end of the day, it stopped. So it was saved. Unfortunately, Twyford Downs wasn't. But that was where I met my husband. He used to turn up every week to help me campaign. This is my lovely husband, Mr. Wolf. And you can see we're being handfasted in the woods. This is 32 years ago. That's a long time ago. And he's a very happy chappy on his motorbike, as you can see. And we're both druids. This is a ritual we did in Stonehenge with Obod, and he's an artist. That's you saw by the pictures. But he is also very, very kind of into magic and things. He's fascinating. But I am biased. Sorry. As I said, we're druids, and this is us at Glastonbury tour during one of the, I think it was the 50th, and there's us with our sticks, letting everybody in and guarding the entrance. Obod is wonderful. I found it in 2012 by listening to Druidcast, which I thoroughly recommend on. And Ema, who's Mother of Dragons I was talking about earlier on, she's the lady with the white hair. She interviewed me on Fireside Chat because she didn't know very many people at the time. She'd just been taken over as chosen chief. So I got to be grilled by Eva in front of thousands of people on YouTube, and that was terrifying. And my husband also went under the same scrutiny because she knew both of us. And Obod also do public rituals. So we were asked to do the autumnal equinox a couple of years ago, 2022. And our group is all over the world. We've got people in Ecuador, we've got people in Puerto Rico, we've got people in Gibraltar, and so we're all doing it online. So we did this whole ritual online, which was great fun and terrifying again, live, but Ema's brilliant, so I can't recommend Ema enough. She's a dear friend. She's from Kenny, so she's Irish. But getting on to more important things, house healing, my training. I loved the idea of healing houses. I loved the idea of healing land. So in 2014, I went to Hawkwood. Now, I've been to Hawkwood loads of times. It's like a very interesting place. It's Gothic. It's I think it's grade 2 listed building, is it? Beautiful, most Gothic-y place you ever met. And we did an awful lot of magical events there with Marion Green and other people, and Naomi, loads of other people. So I've been there many, many times. It's in the Cotswolds and it's gorgeous. But I was intrigued because Caitlin had told us about this wonderful course they were doing. Now, Kate Brannigan is over here in Ireland with us, and Caitlin is actually half Irish, London Irish as she calls herself. So I did this whole Tending the Hearth course, which was very shamanistic, and I'd only been in the Druids 2 years, so I was a bit new to it all then. But they're both very, very kind of prominent Druids, and we did an awful lot about the land and the clearing and the spirits of place and things. But what I didn't know we were going to do was Hawkwood College is totally and utterly haunted. Really haunted, seriously haunted, which I hadn't really noticed when I was younger, but we were put in a room and told to deal with what's in there without being told what it was. And that was fascinating. Talk about baptism by fire, but we had a whole two days of that, which was amazing. So I don't think she's ever done another one. I think I was very lucky to get into that one, but that was fascinating because it was magical healing, magical house healing. Then I met this handsome man and did his two weekend courses. Adrian's lovely. And I came over from Ireland special, and Adrian was a dote. He used to kind of give me a lift, and we'd set up the space together because we were staying in the same place. He's an absolute gentleman. I'm very fond of Adrian, and I look forward to his weekend soon. And I did both of his house healing courses and thought that might completely change my life. And oh, sorry, no, I'm jumping ahead now. Sorry, beg your pardon. Why have I done that? No, try that way. There we are. Right, sorry. When I came back to Ireland, I wanted to be a ranger, and I didn't speak Irish. I do now, but it doesn't really help now. But I couldn't get my job because I didn't speak Irish. So I learned corn dollies in England. I'd always wanted to make them since I was a child, and lovely old lady showed me how to make them. And so when I came over here, it became my life. It was the only way I could pay the bills. I did a bit of gardening, a bit of ecology, but I taught in schools a bit. But the corn really took off, and this is what I do. This is what I do now. I started making things, and I love amulets and charms and anything folkloric or magical, and I use whatever I can find. So you've got cornucopias, you've got Rowan crosses, you've got hagstones. I'm actually giving, I can't believe this, I'm actually giving a talk to a library in Cashel, which is near the Rock of Cashel, in a week or two soon, on amulets and charms in Ireland. I can't believe I'm doing that. It's a bit like kind of like teaching the Pope to douse. It's Ireland is changing. It's wonderful. So I've been making these things for a long time now, and there's a wonderful magical shop in Cork called the Woodman's Realm, who I thoroughly recommend you looking up, who I sell a lot of my stuff through. But I use these in my house healing because a lot of these would be house protections, or they'd be like the one with the Nazar at the bottom there. That's a Mexican design. Cornucopia for good luck or abundance, and the Druid symbol, and we've got Celtic knots. The ones in the top right-hand corner are triple glory braids. They sweep out a negative energy and sweep in friends. So I loved all the folklore, so I researched all the folklore, and that's what people really seem to like, so which is nice. I also get to do some amazing things. I get asked to do the strangest things sometimes. That big circle that the woman's just about to walk through, that's Dublin in Clondalkin. I was given I was asked in the beginning of January to make a 21-foot girdle for Bridget, which is basically plaiting 21 feet of straw, which took me a whole week to do. But it was traditional to walk through the girdle on St. Bridget's Day, and it would keep you healthy for the rest of the year. It was cheaper than the BHI or whatever it is these days. So I had to make one big enough for everybody to walk through. And I made one last year, and thousands of people walked through it, went through schools and everything, which is rather nice. But it's nice to have that tradition. And St. Bridget's Day over here in Ireland has become an official bank holiday last year. And I think everyone was just so fed up of green beer and getting drunk. But it's exploded in here, and everybody now loves Bridget's Day, and massive big events now, which is fantastic to see. The chap who is overlooking the rocks there, that's Robin. I was asked to make a wicker man for a magical shop. Now, I don't know if you know what wicker man is, but they're not. I expected the shop to be firebombed, but it wasn't. So I made him in the traditional straw boys costumes. He's about 2.5 foot tall, and he's actually alive. I put a little spell in him, so he's like a protector for the shop, and that's where the Woodman's Realm. Robin is now Robin Goodfellow, and he protects the shop, and everybody knows him. And he often ends up in the window with glitter on, or fairy lights, but he's very, very much alive. I make things for other druids. The one where you've got the black background there, that is my friend Pat, who's a fellow druid. I found a pike's jaw when I was walking down by the woods, by the river, and she was into magpies, and I'd already got magpie's feathers, and badgers. And I'd actually had a badger try to get through the cat flap in my pottery to get to the cat food, and had left half his fur behind in the process of breaking my cat thing because they're big. And so I collected the badger's fur, no idea what to do with it. And then she said, oh, what I really need is something for a badger. So it's weird how these things happen. So I made that for Pat. I made Broomstick and a whole couple in Dublin who wanted to do a Lunasar wedding, which is basically the corn. And I had to show them how to jump the broom and everything. So that was fascinating. So I've done lots of really interesting. I made a banshee for the shop with a speaker inside which screamed as well every time the lady pressed it on her phone. So she'd wait for these people to come up to the banshee, and then she'd make her scream horrifically. So we have lots of fun. And so I get to do lots of really, really curious things. And the actual long thin thing that's laying on the mossy bit there, that is called a cailleach, which is where Cailleach Cottage comes from. Cailleach means old woman or hag or witch. And I got told that as a name for my business. I got given that when I was standing at a crossroads one day. And I decided after lockdown to stop what I was doing, teaching schools, which was lovely, but lots of traveling. And I got told to start Cailleach Cottage magically by somebody I worked with at the crossroads. And I've been doing it ever since. And this is almost the last one. Oh no, sorry, not quite. Oh, there's Robin lit up for Christmas, as you can see. He's quite a celebrity now. I make spirit dolls and kitchen witches and all sorts of strange things. I made hairs for Ostara a couple of years back, which was interesting, out of straw. But I love making things. I love a challenge. I get given all sorts of things. The circle with the cross in, I had a customer for house healing who had a fairy path that bisected her house. So we to work with the fairies, we actually worked out what she could do, but we put that there as like something to stop the fae, because we made agreement that where that was, they weren't to travel. And she said she was having them going through the house, and it was causing havoc at the time. And we had made this whole petition and offerings and whatever. The fairy fort below her had been destroyed. She thinks that's why she was having trouble. And so we did this and we gave them offerings and we explained that that was the place they couldn't walk, and they've never done it since. And she put that up and she's delighted because she's not had them wandering through a living room anymore. But spirit, it's like moving a spirit path. So that was interesting. And I've herbal spells and all sorts of things. I love doing anything with a bit of a challenge. The weirder, the better. This I will show you very quickly, and I'm nearly finished. I was asked to make something for Lunasar. So this is one of my goddesses made of straw. You can see all lots of Kalyak there. And she was in the window of the magical shop. And that's a cornucopia. And on the side, she has a little spiral drop dolly. And all that is straw other than the orange you can see. So my lovely husband did the filming. He's very, very, very patient with me. So that's that one. And very quickly, this is Bridget. I was asked by a lovely American lady to make a topsy-turvy doll. I didn't even know what one was. I had to look it up. I had no idea how to make one. So I trusted. And this is what we made. That's Bridget. Now, she obviously is the goddess of spring and the 1st of February. And so every time it comes to Samhain or Inahauna, and she changes over into the Kalyak or the goddess of winter, that's my topsy-turvy doll. So she turns into the hag, and she has a hag stone, and her hair is actually made of the most amazing wool, dreadlocked wool that my friend has, a sheep. She gave me some, and I thought, I've got to use that. That's really cool. And lastly, this is her turning back. I don't know if you can see this. This is her turning back into some Bridget. So I don't even know sometimes how to do these things people ask me to make, but I sit and meditate, and I asked for help from upstairs, and I get all sorts of strange things come through, and things turn up. It's the weirdest thing. Things will suddenly turn up that I need. So I'm very lucky. They're looking after me, keeping an eye on me, I think, as well. So there she turns back into some Bridget. So just to give you an idea, my lovely husband doing the hand modeling, and that's my business, Kalyak's Cottage. And I make absolutely all sorts of weird and wonderful things. And I love doing things that nobody else, and fetishes, I particularly love fetishes. I've made witches and all sorts of things. And that's all, folks. I thought it was appropriately weird. So I will stop sharing.
Melanie, oh my goodness.
Sorry. Are we okay for time? Oh God, we did just.
You're so much better now, and it's been a delight to take a peek into your world, and would love to open it up for anyone with questions for Melanie. I'm sure there are many.
There's stunned silence, I think, really. You can ask me anything. Hello. Yeah, I can see your sun's shining at least. Hello, Rachel. You're back. So, any questions? You can be as strange as you like. You won't be stranger than me. No, they're all stunned silence.
Question about how your magic kind of shows up in your house healing. So there was a really great example there where you used your amulet to create a bit of a diversion for the fairy path. But how does it show up in your land and your space healing?
I have a friend who's Dutch, called Martin, and he bought a house that also had activity, let's put it that way. And he was having, with a lot of people here have trouble with the Anshi, which is what we call the fairies. They're not like normal fairies, because they are actually based on the old Irish gods, the Tuatha Dé Danann. And every rock here, every mountain, every stream has a legend and a story. It's all very land based, and they were the ones that were supposed, they took over from the Fomorians, and they were supposed to have turned up on May Day in their magical boats from the other world, and then they were supposed to have burnt their boats so they could never go back. And they fought the Fomorians and took over the land, and they ruled for however long. We don't really know because they're mythical. And then the Milesians, which are basically us, turned up, and they fought, and they went to the underworld. They went to the Hollow Hills. And above me, we have a fairy fort, which is very active. When we first bought our house here, we were on a honeymoon. It was 1992. We'd been to Cornwall on the motorbike, and my son, who was only 6, had gone with his father, and when he came back, because we'd never had a holiday, I was a single mum, I didn't have any money, my ex-partner never paid anything, so we never went on holiday. And so we came back and my son said, oh, mummy, can I go on honeymoon? I thought, how do you explain that to a 6-year-old? It doesn't make sense, does it really? So Wolf said, oh, we can go camping. So we all bundled into his Mini with tents and sleeping bags, and he wanted to go to Scotland and it was really cold. So I said, no, let's go to Ireland. I'd been over here a few times with an ex-boyfriend from the north, fallen in love with the south because he was up in Northern Ireland, which is beautiful too. And we'd found this list of places that we could look at just for fun. We had no money. We had no idea what we were doing. And they were like house-shaped piles of bricks. And they literally were a pile of bricks. There was you saw Biddy's house. They were like that. The Celtic Tiger had hit, so everyone had got rid of their old houses and bought new bungalows and left all the old ones to rot. This place had been empty for 40 years with no windows and doors. Had a cow in the kitchen when we looked at it, and it had no running water, never had running water, never had electricity, never had plumbing or anything. So we had to do it ourselves. Thus, the agriculture college came in handy. And but we were looking at places just out of fun because we were a bit high still from our honeymoon, and it was exciting to have my son to go somewhere on holiday. And so we followed this list, which was really obscure list. The signs all point the wrong way and they're in Irish, so finding anywhere was interesting. Thus the dowsing, that helped. And we came here. We looked at one place and it was like Biddy's. It was just too much. And we got to this place and my little boy ran down the drive and said, Mummy, we're home. And I thought, oh, damn, we are. And I knew this place. I just knew this place. And we were told not to fall in love with it because it was a fairy path going down. It comes down a drive and goes right at the front of my house and goes out to two big hawthorns in the garden, fairy trees. And it has a reputation as being spooky, and loads of people have tried to buy it and everybody had been put off. We got the house in 3 days and the money turned up, and I have no idea to this day why, how, or where, or when. It just, you were meant to live here. And we were talking about Kuryakin, you and Christian Kuryakin, and how the house was. He said the houses draw you. We were here. I literally went home with no money, and this money just kept turning up. It's never happened since, sadly. But weird things happened, and I swear the Anshi decided we were the right ones to be here because we were odd. And we've been here ever since. We've been here 32 years and I love it, and I wouldn't live anywhere else. And my husband's as strange as I am, so luckily we're still here. But we've used an awful lot of that. When you build in Ireland, you have to ask permission, especially in a fairyland. Now Blossom will know this. You have, there's certain things you have to do. We just built in the west, which is the one thing you're not supposed to do. And we had an old hay barn that fell down almost. It was going to fall down before the next wind, so we took it down and built a studio there instead. But I put 4 sticks in the corners of where we wanted it to be, and I gave an offering to the Anshi and said, we'd like to build here, are we allowed? And if even one of those fell down, that means you can't build. And they stayed up for a whole week. I go out there and check every morning, and I was like so excited. And there's all sorts of things we do. Like we've had people turn up to do this, put a septic tank in because we didn't have one, and we had compost toilets for years, which are not pleasant. And so I said to the guy, oh no, it was ESB, the electricity board. They came down my drive without permission, and they had this massive big truck, and you don't put iron on a fairy path. And he just parked there, and I said, what are you doing? And he said, well, we need to get to that thing. I said, you need to ask permission first. And he's like, well, I'm here. And I thought, well, yeah, you're not going to get off though. It wouldn't move. It was there for 3 days. It just refused to work. It just died. And the guy was really angry. And I said, well, you didn't ask permission. And so I made him go and ask permission, give it whiskey. I gave it all to him and said, just do that and say sorry. And it started working straight away. And we've had so many people do that. We've had loads of people. One guy turned up and just appeared at the bottom of outside my cottage to watch a video because he heard we'd got a video recorder or a video player. And he came in and did it without being very polite. And my dog, I had a really sweet little dog, never did anything naughty. When he came down, had eaten all their shoelaces. Every single shoelaces were chewed to pieces, and their van wouldn't work either. So he never came back. So we've had all these weird things, and we had squatters here when we first moved. We moved in, we went back to England to get everything. We came back to find we got 4 squatters. And I wrote to them and said, look, guys, you're going to have to move out. You've got no permission to be here. And I thought if my husband goes, there'd be fisticuffs. I used to work in I used to be enforcement in the park, so I used to throw drunks and paedophiles and druggies and everyone out 3 o'clock in the morning. So I thought, I've no problem with a bunch of kids. And so I wrote them this long letter saying that, you know, sorry, you don't have permission to live here, please move out. I got a 4-page letter back by squatters complaining about the place being haunted. Because the minute I said you're not allowed to be here, the house erupted. They said there was things going missing, there was things flying, there was lights, music, little barefoot prints going everywhere. The place just freaked them out. Now, I think they probably were on drugs as well. I'm not denying that fact, but they literally left and complained about my house, which I thought was hilarious from squatters, but there you go. So the place is protected. So I believe working with the land is really, really important. And when we first came here, being blow-ins, as it's known over here, because we're not Irish, we made offerings, we talked to the land, we asked permission, and we work with the land spirits. I've spent a lot of time working with the land spirits, and be that the spirit of place, be that the house guardian, or all those things are very important. And in Ireland, people are very Catholic, but also very pagan. It's really strange. They're nearer to that than you'd expect. So I get an awful lot of people popping in to ask advice about things, or would I come and have a look at this, which is really nice. So, but anyway, any other questions? Otherwise, I'll waffle on forever with my Gemini rising.
Hand up.
Hi, hello there, Melanie.
Hello, Lynn.
Yeah, hiya. I'd like to ask you, you were talking about your childhood in the beginning, and you know that you didn't know your father, etc. And I know you and I have had conversations about this occasionally. I just found myself wondering, as you got older, if you'd used any of your magic abilities in searching for any of your lost family members.
Good question. Part of me didn't want to find them because I'd been told horrible things about them. My Irish adoptive parents told me terrible things, which weren't true, I found out later. So I wasn't really inclined to be honest. I was curious. And I think I told you recently, my mother got in touch, who is 88 now and lives in Canada, funny enough. But I've been told so many stories, I was cautious. But I found out that all the ones about my father were very, very wrong. And it was my mother that was the trouble. And but no, I was very nervous about that. And I suppose I didn't want to find out really, because it was almost better not to know. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah.
It does, and I'm asking for a reason. I have a situation in my own family with twin boys that are now about 80 years old, where we know who the mother was, we don't know who the father was. And I do have a name, and yes, I can go on all of the ancestry type websites to search. But I'm just wondering, with the skills that we have with this kind of work, you know, if anything else will help, yeah. Perhaps I can browse on a map and try and get a location like you did.
That's a very good idea. I didn't realize that was the situation.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
yes, I would definitely say that was a good idea because I mean I've once I realized who my family was, I've managed to find others, but that's more through I didn't have my DNA done till I was 60. My son did it as a gift to my 60th birthday, and that was in lockdown, the first week of lockdown. Like you couldn't really party, but you could. So, but no,
yes,
it's amazing what the DNA can do as well. But it
yes,
might be worth even just using that because I was using the wrong thing. I was bought one that was more English based, whereas all my family are American. They're all from Texas and Georgia and all sorts of places and Florida. They're all over the place. So, you know, maybe even deciding which one to use. And I'd
yes,
also say working with your ancestors. That's what I did. Part of the Druid course was to work with your ancestors. And I was like, I don't know my
yes.
ancestors. Yeah. So
Mm,
that might help. And I
lovely.
made a little altar to my ancestors, which is why my dad keeps popping in. And I talk to them and I give them water every day, water to the dead. And I talk to them and I ask them to help. And they have helped enormously. And I would have been very skeptical of that. So I thoroughly recommend. I don't know if anybody else has worked with their ancestors. Tracy's nodding. Have you? What have you done, Tracy?
Well, funnily enough, Melanie, I mean, we've spoken quite a bit,
Yes.
but my early life is very, very similar to yours. So I was abandoned at 9 months old. And to go on to tracing people, so like I have a half brother who lives possibly a town or two away. And I think I've done a lot of work on myself, a lot of work with ancestors, a lot of forgiveness,
Yes.
etc. And then you get to a space where it doesn't matter anymore.
Yes,
So
exactly.
Eventually I may trace my brother. I have got his birth certificate up, but sometimes those things don't need to be visited.
No,
And as for my mother, I don't know whether she's alive or dead. So yeah, so sometimes it's not, but I've done a lot of work myself and a lot of work with ancestors, and ancestors come in a lot now, especially with the age that I am, and because I'm doing the house healing course with Melanie, with Tim. Yeah, so yeah.
The ancestors, I totally recommend her.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the things that, in fact, I run a closed circle. There is at least one person on the group today that's part of that. And we did a seance night last night at Circle, and we did some glass moving. And one of the group, their biological father came through, and it a beautiful exchange of energy in that space. So there's lots of different ways that you can kind of connect and communicate. And so I'm wondering whether what we did last night just opened up for your dad, your biological.
I wouldn't be surprised. It's funny you should say that, because when my son did my DNA and I kind of got these really obscure connections with people, I thought, I don't even know who you are, because I didn't know who I was looking for. I didn't have names or anything. And I remember I'd been given a picture of my father much later on, and I put that on my altar. And I said, well, can you help? Yeah, I'm here because of you. And suddenly I got this lady from America who got in touch with me called Ruth and said, hello, I'm vaguely related to someone that you're vaguely related to, but we're not related as such. I thought, okay. She said, I'd like to do your ancestry. And I thought, how much is that going to cost me? And she's, oh, no, it's all free, and I'll pay for everything. She paid for ancestry.com and sent it to me and paid for everything. And within a week, she found my whole family. It was a hobby, and we're still friends now. She's lovely, but literally the day that we all found each other was my dad's birthday, and all my sisters were like, "Oh, it's dad, it's dad, it's dad," because they've been looking for me since 1986. Apparently, they knew I existed before. I didn't know anything about them at all. So it's a matter of, how do you start, Linda? You were saying about how to find. So I found personally, like Tracy, I found the ancestors a brilliant way. So have a little chat with those who came before, or those who come in the future even. And but I'll email you as well. I've got a few other suggestions which are a bit more personal. But thank you, Dawn.
Thank you. Well, I am conscious of time. What are we? Oh, 9:22. Oh, 9:22 my time. Maybe in other places. Thank you so much. It's been a delight to take a peek into your world and to be re-inspired for some things. I know that you all enjoyed it as well, so thank you, thank you. Recording will be up if you want to review any of this later today. And next time we have Gary Bilcliffe. So that's going to be a cool session as well. So thank you. It's lovely to see all your great faces. Have a great rest of your day. And thank you again, Melanie. It's been amazing.
Thank you to everyone who bothered to come today. I'm really, really grateful.
Thank you.
Gafoil, which in Irish is see you later. Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you, Melanie.